Welcome to No One Left Behind, Equality, Freedom, and Justice for All, our CLE commemorating Idahobit. My name is Dr. Nathan Madsen, and I am the Managing Attorney for the International Justice Program at the Advocates for Human Rights. I want to thank the Advocates for Human Rights and our co-sponsor, Fredrickson and Byron's Immigration Group, for helping us put on this CLE today. A trigger warning before we begin. We are going to be discussing some very traumatizing and triggering issues today that many LGBTIQ plus people have experienced and have led them to seek asylum outside of their countries of origin. If this is something that triggers you, please make sure to pause the recording or mute the recording while you're watching. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Veronica Cadavid Gonzalez.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Veronica Cadavid Gonzalez, a member of the International Justice and Women Human Rights Programs at the Advocates for Human Rights. Joining me today are Dan Supala, an attorney with Leland Johnson Lewis and a longtime volunteer with the Advocates and current board member, and his former client, Als Ndewala, who received asylum based on a well-founded fear of persecution based on his sexual orientation in his country of origin, Uganda. I want to take a moment to thank Dr. Nathan Madsen, managing attorney with the International Justice Program, who heads the advocates' work, and the all Idahobit Planning Committee for making this event possible and allow us all to learn more about how to be better advocates for LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers. Dr. Nathan Madsen is going to be monitoring the chat for questions and is here in case you have any question. Okay, so Idahobit is a commemoration of the World Health Organization decision to declassify homosexuality as a mental disorder on May 17 of 1990. Idahobit has been commemorated on or around May 17 every year since 2004 and is currently celebrated in 130 countries, including 37 where consensual same-sex sexual activity is illegal. A brief note on language, I will be using the term LGBTIQ+ in this presentation. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer, and other sexual and gender minorities. If I use a modified version of this acronym, it's because I'm talking about those specific groups of people. LGBTIQ plus human rights as are a core priority area for the advocates, both in advocacy and direct services. The advocates regularly collaborates with partners and organizations and individual human rights defenders working on LGBTIQ plus issues to submit reports to United Nations human rights mechanisms. From the start of 2023 until now, we have submitted 13 interventions and worked with new and long-term partners in 9 countries. We also work with asylum seekers fleeing persecution on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, or SOGS status, and have placed more than 50 cases with pro bono attorneys. What do we mean when we talk about LGBTIQ plus human rights? Unfortunately, there are no existing human rights treaties that specifically enumerate LGBTIQ plus human rights. All the major human rights theories, which form a backbone of international human rights law, however, contain provisions that specify that human rights apply to without discrimination of any kind, which has been interpreted to mean that these human rights also apply to LGBTIQ plus people. In addition, the non-binding Yogyakarta Principles and the Yogyakarta Principles plus 10 serve as a means to interpret existing human rights law to more specifically address LGBTQI plus issues. A no-discrimination guarantee means proactively tackling or undertaking measures to eliminate barriers to rights enjoyment. For example, Article 10 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or ICCPR, protects the rights of people in detention, requiring that they be treated with humanity and with respect of the inherent dignity of the human person. The Yogyakarta Principle 9 clarifies that this right should be read that prison officials and personnel have a duty to protect all people in detention, including LGBTIQ plus people from violence perpetrated by other people in detention and by prison personnel. LGBTIQ plus people should also not be marginalized or exposed to risk of further violence or abuse because of their SOGI status. In attempting to protect LGBTIQ plus people, prison officials would not further restrict their rights other than what is experienced by the general prison population. For example, prison personnel should not put LGBTIQ plus people in solitary confinement under the guise of protecting them from larger prison population. Prison personnel should be trained on equality and non-discrimination, including in relation to the SOGI status. Finally, LGBTIQ plus people should receive proper medical care, including medical care that is particular to them, such as gender-affirming care. When states ratified or accede to a UN treaty body committee will monitor these states' compliance under that treaty, that they are fulfilling those standards. In addition to the monitoring compliance, these treaty bodies issue general comments, which provide further clarification of what the treaty means and what actions and omissions violate that treaty. For example, General Commentary 6 to Article 6 of the ICCPR provides further guidance on the right to life. Although the ICCPR does not prohibit the use of death penalty, the general comment makes it clear that the death penalty should only be applied for the most serious crimes, and under no circumstances can death penalty ever be applied as a sanction against homosexuality. Special procedures mandate holders or experts on particular areas of human rights who have been tasked by the UN to investigate specific human rights issues also write reports which clarify LGBTQI plus people's rights under international human rights law. Although the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity is the primary producer of these kinds of reports, other independent experts, special rapporteurs, and working groups can and have written LGBTQI plus human rights standards. For example, the special rapporteur on torture has said that the state's refusal to allow transgender people to change their legal gender is a violation of their human rights and limits their enjoyment of a wide of human rights, such as healthcare, employment, and education. Finally, that one of the core obligations of all states is non-refoulement. Non-refoulement says that states cannot return any refugee or asylum seeker to a country where there is danger to their life, their security, or freedom. And this applies regardless of a state's treaty ratification record. Thus, asylum seekers who make credible claims that they could be imprisoned, experience violence, or risk death because of their SOGI status should be protected for being sent to their countries of origin. Unfortunately, this obligation is not always fulfilled. As I mentioned earlier, the Advocates has a long story of working with LGBTQI plus human rights defenders, both in country and in diaspora, on reporting to the United Nations and regional human rights mechanisms. This also includes working with client activists or individuals who have left their countries of origin and have applied for asylum with the assistance from the Advocates, but still wish to use their lived experience, expertise, and connections to their countries of origin to contribute to these UN reports. For example, the Advocates recently submitted a report on Ethiopia as part of the Universal Periodic Review, or UPR, that we wrote in conjunction with a client activist based in Minneapolis, an organization of diasporic Ethiopian LGBTIQ plus human rights defenders called House of Guatemala, and I'm sorry, like I'm a Spanish speaker, so I might say it wrong. And the report has not been possible without the tremendous input of both client activists and House of Guatemala, because there is so little written about violations of LGBTQI plus Ethiopian human rights. An extremely hostile government and widespread social stigma about LGBTIQ plus people means that international human rights organizations, the UN, and the media have poor idea of what is happening in that country, in Ethiopia. And relying on interviews and consultations with current and previous clients of the advocates, as well as interviews conducted and collected by our partner, we wrote a report that would helpfully lead to a meaningful recommendations made during the review of Ethiopia in November 2024. Another example, our recent report to the Human Rights Committee in Guyana has also produced important results. Earlier this year, my colleague Nathan Matson, and a pro bono attorney, drafted a report and testified before the Human Rights Committee in Geneva. The efforts paid off, and the Human Rights Committee issued its concluding observations to the government of Guyana, recommending that the state adopted comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation and combat violence and discriminations against LGBTQ plus people. While we have not seen LGBTQ plus people from Guyana asking for assistance in applying for asylum here, many of these issues highlighted in the Guyana report are similar to the global trends that we are seeing in LGBTIQ plus human rights violations. These trends are representative of some of the issues that our asylum-seeking clients have experienced in their country of origin. One of the primary issues that we came across in our reporting is the criminalization of consensual same-sex sexual activity between adults. According to the International LGBTI Association, or ILGA Board, an organization that the Advocates is a member of, there are currently 60 UN member states that still criminalize consensual same-sex sexual acts by law, and 2 that criminalize it de facto. De facto criminalization often happens when people are charged on the other crimes that violate morality, and that are like morality in quotes, and charged with unrelated crimes instead of engaging in consensual same-sex sexual activity. Fortunately, we have seen more and more countries striking down laws that criminalize consensual same-sex sexual activity. In a case related last month, the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court held that the law criminalizing consensual same-sex sexual activities between adults in Dominica violated individuals' human rights. Even when countries do not actively enforce these laws criminalizing same-sex and sexual activity between adults, police and government officials sometimes use the threat of enforcement to harass or coerce LGBTQ plus individuals. The threat of enforcement also means that many LGBTQ plus people who experience other violations of their rights, including on the basis of their SOGI status, do not often report these violations to police for fear and that they might face criminal charges. Another serious issue is the lack of gender recognition for transgender people. Legal gender recognition is a process by which a transgender person is able to change their legal gender marker in their identification documentation and be legally considered a different gender. When transgender people do not have access to legal gender recognition, they might be forever be legally considered as their birth gender, despite their gender expression not matching the gender mark of their ID. Without gender recognition, transgender individuals might be prosecuted for consensual same-sex sexual activity if they have sex with someone of a different gender, because legally the government sees these 2 individuals as being the same gender. Even when countries do have legal recognition of the legal gender recognitions, the requirements to change one gender markers might require full gender confirmation surgery, previously referred as sex reassignment surgery, requiring medical, hormonal, or surgical interventions before a person can change a gender marker, which raise questions of an individual rights to physical integrity and self-determination. In 2016, the Special Rapporteur on Torture noted that requiring gender confirmation surgery, sterilization, or other medical procedures may amount to ill treatment and torture. And the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the High Commissioner for Refugees has also identified that certain physical, sexual, psychological harms, including but not limited to domestic of family violence, rape, psychological abuse, harmful practices, or punishment for transgression of social mores, are contra conditions that might support a claim for asylum. These kinds of violence might be committed by a state of non-state actors, and LGBTQ plus women are at greater risk for sexual violence, including coercive rape. Many experience violation of their rights because of social stigma against their real or perceived SOGIE status, especially when there are no anti-discrimination laws. LGBTIQ plus people might be denied housing, education, medical care, or employment, among other things, because of their SOGIE status. In some countries, police do not take serious the claims of people who they perceive to be LGBTIQ plus or who report violations because of their SOGIE status. And when refusing to investigate or doing any adequate job to to assess and provide reparations in case of claims of human rights violations. Further, when state actors perpetrate human rights violations, they might not always be investigated and punished by their actions. Well, I want to close saying that finally, the above issues are just some of the counter conditions that might drive LGBTIQ plus people to seek asylum outside of their countries of origin. I want to highlight that many LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers might still experience homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia in their destination countries. This is a complex issue to review. With this, now I'm gonna pass the bono, pass the microphone to all Sendewala and Dan Spola, who will share about their experience about as a gay asylum seeker and his pro bono attorney, respectively. Alan, Dan, thank you so much for being here and talking to us today. All, can I ask you please, if you can share with us, what are the particular needs that LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers have that cisgender heterosexual asylum seekers will not have?
Um, this is a great this is a very great opportunity to dive into lives of people that go through a lot. We're born and raised having a family of male and female. And this is rooted from culture and religion. That's how family is supposed to be designed. It's so hard when you're raised in that environment. And you definitely know you're different. And you're different, but you cannot express that difference because of fear. Fear is one thing that really attracts our minds and our bodies. It does a lot. And it prevents us from achieving a lot because it seems to be like an imprisonment. So heterosexual asylum seekers have a lot of opportunities where it's so easy for them to get connected to the community, versus the non-heterosexual asylum seekers who have experienced a lot of different things that they themselves can speak for themselves, particularly. Some of them are general, some of them are specific, depending on what they went through. And because they would like to conceal their identity, they do not have a community. And being born and raised from a different country, from a different culture, combining all those elements, binding them up together is so hard. And there is no community, in a foreign LGBTIQ person. It takes a while to get involved in a community that understands you or that you understand them. And that takes support. Support that never one has ever had while growing up. It's so easy for someone who has support, but it's so very difficult for someone who doesn't have support. And it comes because people are very much filled with doubt. You don't know who you can trust and who you cannot trust. And this comes back to the fear factor that has really affected a lot of people, including myself. It could be easier said than done, but that's how it is.
Thank you all. Thank you for sharing that with us. It means a lot sharing your perspectives here. Like, we are very honored to hear like your expertise on this. Dan, with that all say, I want to pass the question to you. How can lawyers representing LGBTIQ plus asylum seeker can respect those needs? Like, what are some of the best practices for representing LGBTIQ plus asylum seekers?
Well, I think the last part of what Al had to say, which was coming from a place where you don't have a community, is really difficult. And so, we take it for granted here, certainly in Minneapolis, but, in other parts of the United States where we have a big gay community. I've got a lot of gay friends who I, can hang out with and get support from. So recognizing that people are coming from a place where they don't have that kind of support, oftentimes it is a place where being LGBTQ may be illegal. Certainly there are, what Al said, cultural factors at play, religious factors at play, but legal issues too, where, a couple of the slides that you had put up where there are, specific laws on the books that make same-sex, consensual same-sex practices illegal. People are coming from a place where there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of shame, and I think one of the most important things that a lawyer can do who's taking on one of these cases is to learn as much as you can about that person's country of origin yourself. So before you even meet with the person, you want to go find out, pull the U.S. State Department country reports. They talk about the human rights issues going on. And in at least all of the ones that I've looked at recently, in the section where they talk about human rights, there's always a section on LGBTQI plus rights and conditions in the country. So you can get a good general background about what's going on. some of the reports that the advocates puts together. So one of the ones that you had on your previous slide that you had done a report about Cameroon that has a lot of background information, but it also has client testimonials about things that have happened to them. So you can read about things that are happening sort of generally in the country and that have happened to specific people. And then you can look at, just run a Google search of, whatever country the person is coming from and LGBTQI plus rights, and you'll get a ton of news stories about what's happening in the country. Sometimes you'll find great stories from, American newspapers and things like that. Oftentimes you'll find things from other international sources. There's a ton of reporting that you can go and read and review to learn about what's going on in someone's country. So when you meet them for the first time, you have a better sense of where they're coming from and what's going on. And then you can talk about, what you've learned, and that helps to build the trust between you and your client. So they can understand that you're interested, that you've taken the time to learn about where they're coming from and what kinds of things are going on in their country. And that makes it easier for them to open up and talk to you about what's going on in their own lives. I think the other thing is that you have to be really patient. I've handled asylum cases for a lot of LGBTQ plus people and some political asylum cases. And they're a little bit different in that you have to be really patient in working with your client. I think there's maybe a more particular kind of trauma that people suffer when they're persecuted because of their identity, whether they're out, whether they have a small community of friends and maybe no one else really knows about their identity. It's such a personal thing that you have to be patient with people who haven't been or had sort of the opportunity like people here in the United States have to come out and be accepted by your family. When I came out, my family was great. I was very nervous about it, but didn't have that, the sort of fear was unfounded for me. People don't have those kinds of experiences. So understanding that there's going to be a difference between those two and being patient with people and letting them open up on their own timeline, I think is really important. It may take more meetings. You may have to have more than one sort of initial meeting so you can get to know each other. But once you start to build that trust, I think it helps alleviate a lot of the fear that people come with, a lot of the shame that people come with, and can really help address those issues. And I think the last thing I would say is, part of representing LGBTQI plus asylum seekers is not just doing the legal work, but also helping people find a community or find people that they can talk to, who are maybe, not lawyers, but other folks that can help build their own community so they have a support system. Because I would tell you, going through the asylum process can be very difficult. And if you don't have a community of people to support you, it can be even more difficult.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for sharing those best practices you have implemented over the years working with asylum seekers. And it's so good to see you two so sync, when you talk about the barriers, because now we see why you won the case. You were a very good. It's amazing hearing you two talk about your collective journey. Do you mind sharing with us, what are the barriers that you have identified that LGBTQI plus people experience in the asylum process when they're seeking for asylum?
First of all, like Dan has mentioned, many aspects are very fundamental into this process. Building trust is one thing, this comes with the fear factor that, fear rose like it's a core of everything. And you have to be confident with the person that you're sharing this information with. And I would say that I was really very fortunate and very lucky, and because I had Dan on my side and my other attorney, Chris. I mean, everything like was so smooth, but the factor of proving your sexuality to someone so that they can find you credible for the case that you're presenting to every single person, especially the judge, it's hard. And that it's really so hard because you don't know what it's gonna happen at the end of it all. You know, it's just like an onion, you peel the layers, but you have to take time. And Dan has mentioned that it's not an overnight, transaction, whatever it is, but it takes time and you have to learn the culture of the people and, what religion. We have a lot. And I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to get to learn how to, through the advocates of human rights, dealing with people who have experienced trauma, because I myself individually, I have experienced a lot of trauma and a lot of people have. And so disclosing all of that you've gone through, you know, it takes a lot of time. And this is a situation where, you know, the attorney may not be having time, to wait for you to discuss all of that. They could be running into cases and they don't have only one particular case. They have lots and lots of cases. And so they would like you to disclose this information so that they can pile all that up together. And you might not have the energy to meet them where they want you to be at that point. You might not have the security. And so again, it goes back to the patience. Dan has mentioned, like it takes a while. I mean, creating a balance between those two situations is really so hard. It's complex by itself, but it comes back to where you feel like you're confident. And if there is trust built up, it's so easy to open up. Like, it's something that would take maybe 10 minutes. It will take a minute or two because you're confident with the person you're sharing the information with. And that wraps up, you know, the case.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And if I can, now you're mentioning like about like being confident, I want to talk a little about what in broader we can do. Like I want to ask a little about like how, like what we can, like the broader community can do to support. What kind of relationship do LGBTQI plus asylum seekers have with the broader LGBTQI plus community in Minnesota? What they can do to support LGBTQI plus asylum seekers? And I'm just have a lot, like some questions that are related to each other, but like what do you want non-asylum seeking LGBTQI plus people to know about LGBTQI plus asylum seekers? Like what do we need to know?
Um, the point is that we come from different cultural backgrounds and religion. Every country is different. Specifically, Uganda is very harsh. It's between death and life imprisonment. You cannot do that to a person. But I mean, you're taking all the rights that the person has that, is born with, right to live, you know, right to relate, right to love the person they really want. I mean, you take away literally every single core of what they're born with. And that's so hard. Um, and coming from different experiences into Minnesota specifically. Minnesota is so friendly, but again, you have to take steps, steps on knowing who the right person is that you can share your information with, who can connect you to different people. It takes a while, you know, but attorneys, if they understand all of this, you know, some people have experiences which are really so easy, disclosing their personal life to their families and friends. Some people, it's so hard. You can lose everything and hit rock bottom, like lose family, lose friends, lose everything literally. And that's also another crash by itself, like you're crushed all the way to the core. And piecing that back up together, it's not a one-time thing because you're shattered.
And I want to maybe I mean not ask you like how we can help to people to get their like the life that they want, that they deserve, like how we can support like in terms of like we talk a little about like housing and like some issues that sometimes like when we see the broader threats that like come to LGBTQI plus people, like do you think that like we need to support those while we are here in Minnesota? What do you have
Yeah,
like
definitely. Yeah, definitely. When you lose everything, that means you don't have anything. You know, housing is one thing that one needs, you know, having a roof under, I mean, under your head is that's I mean, that's vital. That's very important for a human person. You have, you know, living somewhere where you have feel security. And so connecting asylum seekers to housing facilities, that's really good because then they feel like they are grounded and then the fear lessens bit by bit, you know. Now they say, I have a home, I connecting them to different jobs and, you know, having them connected to, you know, healthcare providers. So, you know, they have, I mean, mental health is the core. Mental health is so, oh my goodness. I don't, if I describe mental health, I can go on and on. But what I could say specifically, what the pandemic caused is that it unleashed a lot of mental health, you know, issues. And that was between both heterosexual and non-heterosexual people. But just think about how a person is born and has that mental health torture from while they are so young. And, you know, they don't disclose all of this up until maybe they are teenagers, maybe they are in late 20s. Some people do it up until they have families and they have kids and they're 50. And, you know, it's all different. But
thank you.
yeah.
Thank you all. You know, like I feel like we are learning so much from this. Like I want to thank you for sharing all this knowledge about how we can be better advocates. Dan, now with what all just share with us, I want to ask you how can lawyers can build trust and create that safe space for the clients so that the clients return their agency while telling their stories. Like how
I mean, I think there's a lot you can do. Like I said before, you know, it often takes a few meetings with people to get them to open up to you. I have the benefit of being able to talk about my husband and, you know, the things that we like to do, and that makes it a lot easier, I think, for people to open up to me when, you know, when we're dealing with these sorts of issues. Because it sort of immediately there's some connection between the two of you where it's like, okay. You know, I may not have grown up in Uganda like Al did, and he may not have grown up in Minnesota here. But there's some sort of baseline understanding between the two of us. It's like, okay, sort of, you know, you get it. Um, one of the things that I think is helpful is to talk to people about what else is going on in their life here. What Al was talking about with housing and things like that is I'll check in with my clients about, how's your job going, working on getting a work permit, seeing how the job search is going, how are things going at home, just what else is going on in their lives here to see if there's anything that they need support with. And oftentimes, if you sort of identify some issues, the Advocates has great resources where if somebody's having some mental health issues, there are a lot of providers here where you can refer them to, like CVT, the Center for Victims of Torture. So there are other ways that you can not only provide support to people outside of just the legal work, and I think that helps build the trust as well. So when you do have to talk about traumatic issues, your client understands that you care about their well-being just outside of their case. And I think that makes a huge difference because a lot of the times people are coming from places where maybe you can't get the healthcare that you need in your country of origin. Um, if you're not gay, if you're not trans, and you're working with LGBTQI plus clients, having a good understanding of what it means for somebody to be gay, what it means for somebody to be trans can help, and not just the surface level of, I have a gay friend, I work with somebody who's gay, something that's not superficial like that, where you have taken the time to learn about the communities that people are in, even here in the United States. So you can sort of reach across the bridge, if you're a straight person representing a trans person or representing somebody who's gay, that you show them that you have an understanding of, not necessarily what it's like to be in their shoes or to live life in their shoes, but it's the sort of empathy that you need to develop, which I think fosters a lot of trust between you and your client. And that's really on the lawyer to do that sort of work, to do that background work to understand, where their clients are coming from.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for sharing all those tips that I'm pretty sure a lot of people who represent asylum seekers are like eager to hear and to like implement. I want to close asking like this part of like Q&A, like this conversation that we're having, because we are gonna have after that a Q&A, asking you, why does working as a pro bono attorney representing LGBTQI plus asylum seekers matter? Like, why is this so critical?
It's hugely important because the way that the asylum system is set up, it can be very difficult to navigate. So immigration work is not my primary focus outside of doing pro bono work. And it can be very difficult to understand the system, even for a lawyer who's, practicing law every day. Imagine somebody coming from a different country who is totally unfamiliar with the asylum system. It's even more difficult. And if I'm remembering the stats correctly, we talked about this last week a little bit, having a lawyer represent you in your asylum proceedings makes it exponentially more easier to get a grant of asylum. I think it was, 90% of asylum seekers who are represented by lawyers are able to be successful in getting a grant of asylum. So it makes a huge difference. And if you look at the other side of the coin, if you don't have a lawyer who can help guide you through the system, it can be even more difficult. Having someone, one of the things that we often find is that people who are coming from other countries don't have a good experience with the court system, with the justice system there. And it can be really intimidating to have to go into court in foreign country. Maybe you don't speak the language and you need to have an interpreter, where there's security guards outside, there's a government lawyer who is more than ready and happy to cross-examine you for hours about the most seemingly, not important things, and just to grill people. You've got a judge there wearing a black robe who may or may not ask questions, and having someone who can prepare you for that process is super important, because you're going to have to go up on the witness stand and tell your story. And that can be very difficult for people to do, and it can be very intimidating, particularly when you're in the courtroom with a bunch of strangers. So making sure that you get people ready for that, and that you have a lawyer who's been through it before and can tell you this is what the judge is going to do, this is what the DHS lawyer is going to do, is super important, because then people are more comfortable going through the process and being able to provide as much detail about their story as possible. I think the second piece that's really important is getting the case ready. You have, the government and the judge are going to be looking for as much information as you can provide to corroborate their story. The government is very skeptical about these types of claims. And I think they find it difficult to believe that someone would, come out as gay, be gay, and there's no really physical way for the government lawyer to look at the person and say, well, how am I supposed to know that you're gay? It's your word versus my word, and they're very skeptical about those things. So having a lawyer who can help you pull together all the information you need to corroborate your claim is super important. We worked with Al on this, and I remember sitting down and talking about this issue, and we're like, well, let's think about what sort of evidence you may have that you can corroborate your story with. And we talked about, do you use any dating apps, for example? And taking screenshots of people that they've messaged or people that they've gone on dates with to say, these are the people that I'm looking to date, and they're obviously, other men, and these are people that I've talked to. But that can be, I mean, imagine somebody picking up your phone and wanting to go through it and just take screenshots of your dating app conversations. Very personal information that you have to disclose, but having a lawyer to help you find that kind of information can go a long way. So when we went in for Al's hearing, we had done all that legwork already to show them you don't just have to take Al's word for it. You can see, here's pictures of him at Pride events. Here are people who he's been talking to, people that he's gone on dates with. Having someone to help you find that information, because it may not be something that you want to have to disclose to the government and say, here's the evidence that I'm gay. But finding a way to find the best evidence you can while also honoring the person's sort of privacy and their personal life, and letting them live their personal life, and finding the balance between the two so you can win the case, but they don't feel like they're just sort of being exposed out there, to the government to have to disclose all of these things is really important. So I think those are the couple of things, having somebody to help you get ready for the hearing, and then having someone help you find all the corroborating evidence. So then when the government does ask you to sort of prove up, your LGBTQ plus status, you've already got the evidence there to show them.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all. I feel like I've learned so much listening to you too. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm sure the audience has a lot of questions because you have taught us so much. So I'm gonna pass the baton to Nathan, who will be running the Q&A.
Yes,
Up to you.
thank you, Veronica, and thank you so much,
That's
Al
who the
and
court
Dan.
uses too. Lambridge, yeah.
I'm sorry,
Right.
Oksana, did you mean to unmute yourself? Okay. Thank you, Al, and thank you, Dan, so much for your really wonderful insight into this really complicated area. As Al mentioned, it is a very complicated area, and the need for a lawyer in these asylum cases is so evident and apparent. So I want to open the floor up to questions. If anybody has any questions, they can unmute themselves, or you can put the question in the chat. Okay, we have a question. Are there ways to address some of the root causes pushing LGBTIQ plus people to seek asylum? Veronica, do you wanna answer that? You're on our international justice team.
I'm gonna talk a little, but then I would like to hear all's perspective. But I feel like we were talking a lot about like the work that we do in the United Nations. We need to see this as an advocate, like as something that we can do advocacy in the home countries too, and make sure that we expand those like protections, so people feel safe and can and have freedom to decide to live as like who they are with dignity wherever they decide to live. So one of the things that you can do is like do, if you are an attorney, is do not only an attorney, you can do like UN work and like do a work to change those systemic issues that are happening in many countries by doing advocacy in the international arena with the United Nations, or in the domestic arena with, like, of course, with people in each of the countries, like who knows how the situation is running there.
Thank you, Veronica. Al, do you have anything else, like from your perspective as somebody who was in a country and sought asylum elsewhere, what can people in the United States do to help combat some of the issues in some of these countries?
You know, Dan mentioned one thing that is very particular is, how do you prove that what you're saying is really right? And in different countries that you come from, there could be torture, but you don't have like tangible evidence of that. Like, they could not be, I mean, people tortured you and they disappeared. Maybe they were wearing masks, like for my case particularly. And you cannot really, single out one individual that says this and this and that. Probably, there are always, like rumors spread like fire. It's just like a wildfire. Some people may be knowing you and you're just all over the place, but you also that creates a lot of insecurity, and the government, like, the laws that you can go to the police and report this and all of that, you don't have that freedom, because then you're just like jumping out of the frying pan into the fire, because then you'll be held hostage and they will put you in prison. You'll be tortured more than what you're going through outside of that. And so when people from diaspora help out people, support them, talk to them about, this is it, and so it also comes back like someone would be going through a lot of that, and they're applying for maybe a visa to the United States, maybe a visa to the United Kingdom, and they're not granted because you don't have evidence to prove that what you're saying is really right. And this, I mean, you look at it in many different ways, because maybe people have abused the system claiming what they're not, and they've been found out for what they're not. And the people who are genuinely saying, this is what I'm going through. I'm going through hell and I need to be taken out of this danger. But how do you really give that evidence that one is going to say, yes, what, Al is saying is really credible, or whoever is saying that is very credible in what they're saying,
Thanks, Al.
That's, yeah.
It is really an all hands on deck situation, and if you can volunteer or you can help collect stories, you can do research, and as Veronica mentioned, you can also hold governments responsible at the United Nations or in regional human rights mechanisms. All of these different avenues can help alleviate some of the root causes of LGBTIQ plus people seeking asylum. It looks like we have a question from John. This may be our last question. So if you would like to unmute yourself.
Hey, sure. Thank you so much. I'm John. I'm an immigration attorney, but it's been years and years and years since I've handled an asylum case, and I actually have the honor and privilege to work with Dan. I'm right down the hall from him. I have two quick questions. One, Al, I'm just curious if you know Long Jones at all. Long Jones and I have known each other for many, many years. He's also from Uganda. And I'm just curious if your paths have come together. He's an activist here in the US. But also, more broadly for the larger group, I'm wondering if someone can speak to the situation that I'm in, and maybe others in this group are also in, which is I have a very good understanding of the asylum process itself and putting together what needs to be put together for an effective asylum application. The part that I'm not as knowledgeable about is the judicial procedure behind it all, and I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the resources that the Advocates has available for that part of the process.
Certainly. I can start. I think that the Advocates Refugee and Immigrant Program team has a lot of wonderful resources to help any pro bono attorneys that are representing clients. And in addition to trainings on sort of how to take your case from, initially meeting the client to the courtroom, as well as support from if you have questions that arise throughout the process. As someone who's not in the Refugee and Immigrant Program, I can't speak to too much detail about what those resources look like. But anybody who is representing someone through the Advocates can always reach out to the Refugee and Immigrant Program for assistance. And I think that that's one of the probably best ways in order to get support in building up the case as you prepare for trial. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean there are online trainings that the Advocates will do. There is a volunteer manual, which I have an older version of it in my office that walks through a lot of the procedural issues, and then usually you can email one of the folks in the Refugee and Immigrant Program with questions and they get back to you right away. If I have, weird particular questions about a procedural issue or some type of evidence or, the judge or one of those kinds of things, I usually shoot it over to someone at the Advocates and they will, they're working on these kinds of issues all the time too. And so they can, easily answer those kinds of questions for you.
Thank you. And with that, we have reached the end of our CLE today. Again, I want to thank Al and Dan and Veronica for their work on this CLE, and thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me. My email is at the bottom of the screen, and Veronica can as well. So thank you again, and thank you for supporting the LGBTIQ plus work at the Advocates for Human Rights.